Hello again. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that shows up pretty regularly in discussions regarding teen mental health and social media, namely comparison. I'd wanted to talk about how I believe it's being misrepresented in the common argument and advice of stop comparing yourself to others online, and how we could add more nuance to the statement so that it's more generally applicable and effective, because, as with most platitudes, they fail to mention key details that render them less effective than they could be. For starters, the statement is often paired with or replaced by the even more ridiculous advice of don't compare yourself to others. This comical statement ought to be addressed, and to do so I will first be asking why we are so prone to comparison to begin with. Because there's the implicit assumption in the statement that we can stop comparing ourselves with others in the first place, which I don't think is actually true. The answer is better said by an evolutionary psychologist, but the gist is that we do it to know our relative standing within a society, so that we can tailor our behavior to what most befits our status without stepping out of line. The social game is a careful balance of power in a sense, as less powerful individuals suck up to the ones with the most power, and the consequences of not playing this game are generally represented by either some form of isolation, as you don't play the game at all, or mistreatment of some kind, as you haven't played the game effectively. Isolation in our evolutionary context was tantamount to death. Surviving on one's own in the wild was not at all an easy task, especially after having been wired against it for years and years. We forewent the advantages other animals had for the intelligence that then gave us the evolutionary advantage to be highly social and exceptionally effective in group setting, right? Problem solving, a lot of tool usage. Early humans were very creative. The physical traits similar to other animals being selected out, so the strength of chimpanzees and gorillas, for instance, led to us generally lacking the requisite skills and strengths to keep ourselves alive in the harsh and unforgiving wild. We can't climb trees like we used to be able to. This means that because we can't keep ourselves alive in the wild, social excommunication, that being taken out of a society and put on our own in the wild, is essentially a death sentence, and so must be avoided at all costs. We still have that wiring, because the ones who didn't ended up dying without reproducing. We're still comparing ourselves to one another to figure out the status game, figure out who's higher than me, who's lower than me, who can I be a little meaner to or a little more assertive with, who should I step back from, so that we aren't excommunicated. As for us, we're still wired as though excommunication is the death sentence it once was, which isn't necessarily a matter of fact anymore. Social safeties have come a long way, at least for us in the West. I know it's a little different in some other countries. Now that should be a decent overview. We compare ourselves to be fit for a status game that our brains still believe is a matter of life and death. So it's no wonder that we're still doing it past the point it stopped being a death sentence. It's like an automated system now, that takes people and their traits or accomplishments and determines an order of rank into which you are placed appropriately. Maybe in school you determined who is the quote-unquote smartest, based off of who was getting the highest test scores, or in athletics you determined who was the best at the sport based off of who was scoring the most points. It helps to know where you are relative to them, because then it changes the dynamic of the relationship, as it pertains to that specific domain. For instance, learning study habits from a peer doing better than you in class is very different from learning study habits from one doing worse. In most, if not all cases, it's the higher status individual teaching the lower status individual how to raise theirs. Not to mention, you tend to gain more by working with the most productive people in that specific endeavor. So it pays more to know who the most effective are, right? To be ranking them, because then you get the most out of them if you work with them. But that's kind of low-hanging fruit, everyone already knows that. The arguments I've seen that are made against comparison don't typically include discussion about what I believe to be a crucial piece of this puzzle, frames of reference, which are needed to distinguish the good and bad of comparison, the likes of which I will be covering shortly. Where frames of reference come in is when we talk about the data we compare ourselves with. The frame of data to which we reference ourselves, if you will. A small frame of reference is essentially a small data pool of individuals to compare yourself with, and vice versa. What the ranking means when there are less people is less indicative of your actual position as much as it is indicative of your position within this relatively small data pool, if that makes sense. For instance, the worst in a high school track team, composed of only 4 members, is less able to understand his whole position relative to everyone he's competing with than if he was the worst out of 4,000 or 40,000. One dataset tells him massively more than the other, just by virtue of having more data to compare with, because every point becomes less statistically significant. The reverse is also true. Being better than 3 shitters tells you nothing of how skilled you are objectively other than that you're better than those 3. But place first in a competition of a couple thousand, and you'll get a better picture of exactly what you're capable of. Being able to compare like this isn't actually bad for us, unless we make it out to be. Knowing where you rank objectively allows you to ask yourself why you aren't higher, and take steps towards improving your ranking. This is the piece that is always left out. You can't feasibly expect to get better at anything if you have no idea where you are and where being better is. You probably won't even know something is possible unless you know someone else has approximated it. But not comparing at all denies you this freedom to improve, because you don't place yourself in those data pools, which is why I take issue with the argument's reductive nature, even if we assume you're able to not compare at all, which is complete bullshit. Where the internet factors into this whole discussion is a matter of expanding a frame of reference massively more than would be seen naturally. Curated content shows us exceptional people in the domains we're most interested in, and as a result, we begin to subconsciously compare ourselves to these exceptions. Naturally, when you see more and more winners, exceptional winners, your order of rank gets skewed negative, as it is statistically unlikely for you to be one of those exceptions, so you fall in your mental ranking that takes everyone you've seen and compared with and ranks you within it. The issue is that the vast majority of the time, you never see the volume of exceptional people in real life that you see online. You get a lot of biased data in that way, because exceptional people show up online statistically way more than they do in person, without the massive quantities of mediocre people that make these exceptional people stand out by comparison. Let's suppose, for instance, that you have an interest in weightlifting, and consume content about it online. Internet algorithms will take track of this interest and begin to serve you more of that curated content, the likes of which selects for exceptional people and feats, as that content has more engagement by a wider audience. Correspondingly, people who can, for instance, bench 500 pounds plus will naturally appear in your Instagram feed far more frequently than you'll ever meet in most gyms, to the point where it shifts your internal expectations of people upwards just a little bit. These correlations recalibrate when you step back into reality, and the most you'll see in real life is a 3 or 4 plate bench, and many others with much weaker benches to compensate for that one exception in the gym. That's the crux of my whole argument, the recalibration aspect. You can add as many outlier data points into your dataset as you want, but you must then put their statistical weight into perspective. Otherwise, wow, he's so strong becomes, wow, I'm so weak. The line of expectation gets drawn too close to oneself. It starts being your responsibility or fault for not living up to an exceptional standard, rather than the exceptional's ability to reach such heights in the first place. Maybe some people have the right to disparage themselves over their rank. Not everyone can be a 10 out of 10. But it is far less useful and actionable than looking forward to solutions. Wallowing in self-pity may be comforting, but it will not change your rankings. Only you are able to do that for yourself. So my prescription is to compare all you want. Get a ton of data points and put your own ranking right in the mix. But do so with the understanding of what kinds of data points you're getting, exceptional or non-exceptional, and reframe your mindset accordingly. If you've collected an excess of very exceptional data, say, comparing your attractiveness or strength with very, very attractive or strong people, then look at your own ranking with that context in mind, that you've selected for data that is inherently rare and hard to compete with. So you've artificially deflated your own scores relative to everyone else. Maybe to compensate, you can pay more attention to the data points you've neglected. Less attractive or weaker people in this case. If you've done the reverse and cherry-picked the weakest people out of your gym, then understand that you've artificially inflated your own strength against the people you're comparing with. It's classic selection bias. You can make any point you want with the data you have, in so long as you ignore how you got it. But just recognizing that fact, that you will be biased in some way, lets you work with that flawed data. We are in an era in which everyone is consuming content made by the best, or the exceptional. The worst and the mediocre don't tend to make content relating to their domain of interest until they develop that level of expertise. So what happens is that for every one remarkable chef, we do not see the 500 mediocre chefs that make the one chef remarkable in comparison. Correspondingly, expertise is not given its gravity by the people who consume that content, because it becomes commonplace. We see it in every other post on Instagram. Thus, we unjustly compare ourselves against the best without taking into account the worst, which hurts people's self-esteem and self-perception. This does us no good, which makes it all the more important that we iron out these details and give individuals the context they need to make use of the advice they've been given to deal with this circumstance. Comparison is not a yes, nor is it a no. Black and white generalizations do us no good when the devil is always in the details. Make use of it, but don't be used by it. Know what you are doing when you compare yourself to the best. Thank you for watching.